All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Jessica with the Plano Public Library, and I want to thank you all for joining today's program. If you have any questions, you can type them into the chat. Caitlin is going to be helping me out and monitoring the chat, and she's able to assist you with any issues or bring any questions that you guys have to my attention. You'll also be sure to leave time for questions at a couple of points during the program and at the end of the program. A couple of housekeeping reminders that we would like to share with everyone. Note that this program is being recorded and will be made available on the Plano Public Library YouTube page for later viewing. And then soliciting business or selling merchandise during library virtual programs is prohibited. Please show respect for our presenters and to one another throughout the program. All right, so just to begin working into this program, this is the Unity Basics program. So we're going to be learning a little bit about what the Unity software is and a couple of very basic ways to start using it so that you can get started making your own video games. The first question is, what is Unity? Unity is a game engine, which is a code-based software that is used for making video games. While it's possible to make a game without using a game engine, using an engine like Unity helps make the process easier by taking care of some of the work that a game designer would have to do manually if the game engine wasn't there. Some examples of this is portability. If you didn't have a game engine and you were making a game on a Windows computer, it would be very difficult and very time intensive to then take that game you made on the Windows computer and run on, say, an Apple computer or a game console or a smartphone. Unity has export functions built in that make it possible to take the same game that you design on the Windows computer, and then you can export it so it can be played on Windows, but also export it in a different way so that it can be played on Apple, on a PlayStation, on an Xbox, or a lot of systems. Otherwise, the person who's making the game would have to do a bunch of code to make sure that the game that you're making talked to the computer that it was being played on. So Unity takes a lot of that work and makes it so you don't have to worry about it. Another way that Unity helps with game development when you work in it is visualization. Unity lets you see what the game looks like as you're working on it. And other game engines would do that too. But if you don't have a game engine, then every time the person who's making the game wanted to see what a change they made in their code did to how the game looks, they would have to make those edits in the code, compile the code, which once you get into bigger games can be a very long process, and then actually run the game every time they wanted to see what change was made. So if you wanted to see if you changed something from green to blue and you wanted to see how that made the game look different, something that happens very quickly in Unity could take a long time because it has to redo a bunch of work every time you make a change. So Unity basically takes a lot of the background programming and takes it out of the hands of the programmer, which makes it of the game designer, which means that making games goes easier, requires less work, and then once you're done, can be shared in a bunch of different ways without even more work. There are some system requirements for running Unity on a computer. It works with the macOS system at 10.15 plus, as well as Windows 7 with updates. It won't run on a fresh Windows 7 install, but if you've updated it properly, then it would work on a modern Windows 7, and then it can run on Windows 10. The system requirements on the Unity webpage say that 2 gigabytes of RAM is enough to run Unity, but 4 gigabytes of RAM is recommended. And if you have a lower end computer, it's possible that with less RAM, then it's possible that you'd need to stick to either a 2D game or some simple 3D models, because if you have something that has many polygons, then that'll take up a bunch of the RAM that you have, and it'll make things run very slowly. And then a little bit more about what you can use Unity for. Unity is primarily designed as a game development software, a game engine. However, it can be used to make other things like 2D or 3D animated videos. A lot of the tools that it has built in to help making video games also are useful, at least in various stages of animating videos digitally. Unity is a popular choice for making video games because it can do a lot of different types of games. It has a lot of different tools and built-in resources that allow you to very quickly put together the pieces for different genres of games, whereas some other video game engines are more suited for specific types of games. Unity is very general use. It's also free for both personal and hobby use. And then if you decide that you want to sell your game, it only starts having a cost commercially if the entity that is selling the game that you made in Unity has made over $100,000 in revenue or received fundraising over that amount in the last year. So for a lot of beginning game developers especially, it's free, and it has a lot of different options that you can use. And then as we talk about Unity, and especially as we go into the demo, we are going to talk about a couple of things, and we just wanted to go over some definitions before we head into that. One of them is the scene. The scene for a game, if it is a small game, it can take place in one scene, or it could be a level for a larger game. When you're making a game in Unity, you'll be working with one scene at a time. You can transfer between scenes, which is how it becomes different levels in the game. But for the most part, the scene is the workspace that you're working on in your project. Assets are essentially the resources that go into the game. 3D models, any sprites, sounds, sound effects, any music, anything that goes into the game environment, any game items that you interact with the player, all of those things are assets. And what Unity does is lets you take those assets and put them all together within the scene to make your game. One type of asset is a script, and the script is the programming part of Unity. Unity scripts are usually written in C#, which looks like a C hashtag, and it does require a little bit of programming knowledge to use those effectively, but they are how different assets interact with each other and change the game environment. Video games are an interactive media, and so you need scripts to be able to say, hey, this was interacted with in this way. And so all together, inside the scene, you have your assets, which are affected by the player inputs and the player inputs determine how the scripts tell other things to react. Now, when you're making a game, there are two very large bubbles of how your game can look. And it's very generally boiled down to 2D and 3D. When you go into making your game, it's possible to take a game that you originally designed as 2D to make it 3D, and it's possible to take a 3D game and turn it into 2D. However, the earlier you decide which way you are making your game, the less you will have to change to make that work, because a lot of times games that are designed to be 2D won't necessarily adjust to 3D very well. You do want to make that decision fairly early on so that you don't do a bunch of work making something look good in 2D and then have to redo it or change a whole lot of it to make it work in 3D. But in 2D, the assets are made from pixel or vector-based images, which basically just means they're flat. They are 2D. You could draw them on a piece of paper and then scan them into the computer if you'd like. Visual assets and animations made for 2D games for Unity are almost always made outside of the Unity software itself and then imported in. Often they're made in digital art software like Photoshop or GIMP, Clip Studio, even Microsoft Paint, you can make some. And then whenever you want to animate any of those images, typically that is done, you can make a bunch of separate pictures, or you could make one image file that has all those pictures together and then work through them to make animations. For 3D, you use 3D models instead. So those are polygon-based models, which means most of the surfaces in your model are either going to be triangles, occasionally squares. Even if something looks like a circle in a 3D game, that often just means that there's a bunch of triangles or rectangles that have been shaped in such a way and with enough of them that it looks round. They are also often made outside of Unity in software like Maya or Blender, but Unity can create some simple models for you. And we'll be working with those when we get to the demo portion of this workshop. Animation of the models can be handled within Unity, though animations within Unity can get fairly complex, and we're not going to cover it in this session. But you can use scripts and different tools that Unity has to change the shape of 3D models. Okay. And later on, we'll be opening up a few demos that the Unity website has available. And I'm curious if you guys could put in the chat if you guys want a 2D demo or a 3D demo. In the meantime, as we get the results for that, we are going to switch over to Unity. And we're going to start working over there so we can show off some of the things that Unity can do to help you make a game. And depending on time at the end of the program, we may go and do the, if we do 2D first, then we might do 3D afterwards. I'm just curious to see which one has the higher demand, so we do the one that people most want to see before. So we pick the one that has the most interest first. Okay. Now we do have Unity already installed. Can everyone see the Unity Workspace?
Yes, we can see it just fine.
Awesome. Okay. So we already had it installed. We opened up a new 3D project. Unity has you select whether we're working in 2D or 3D at the very beginning. I chose 2D for this demo just because it is easier to see different things in relationship to each other for example purposes in the 3D space. I did already open up the new project, but what you would normally do is you would, after you open Unity, it asks if you want to open an existing project or pick a new project. You'd hit new, you'd hit 2D or 3D, and then you'd start. Everything that's done in this 3D space can be done in the 2D as well. It just, we've chosen to work with 2D for now. We're going to look at the space here just so we know what the different areas in Unity are called. In the top left, we have the hierarchy menu, and it lets you see what objects are in the scene. Right now we have a main camera, which is depicted by a little camera icon, and then a directional light, which shows light shining in one direction starting at a specific point. Those are the only two objects that are in a default 3D scene. This is the scene. It is how you can visually look at what currently occupies your project. And you can see a bunch, there's not much in there right now, but we'll be adding more as we go. The inspector gives you a bunch of properties and sometimes things that you can change about the objects that are in the screen. If nothing's selected, there's nothing in the inspector. If you select something either in the hierarchy or on the scene, it gives you a bunch of information about how it works. And at the bottom, we have the project section, which has a bit of just organizing the digital files that are in your game so that they're easy to find when you need them. Right now, there's only one file. It says scenes, and it's got the basic scene. Okay. And you do actually use a lot of the menu icons here fairly frequently when you work with Unity. So we are going to go through and just see what is interesting under the different tabs. So in file has the typical save as, new project, open project. You can also open up new scenes within your same project, which is how you would add a new level into the game. Also, if you had more than one scene that you had made, you could then switch between different scenes so that if you're like, oh, I changed this in this level, I should go change it back in the other level I made, you can quickly jump between them, even though you can't easily have them open at the same time. Scenes are meant to be more standalone chunks. Okay, and then the save is also there. You are going to want to save frequently because it can be quite frustrating to find something that works and then you change some other things and it doesn't work anymore, and then you can't go back to what worked before. So it's good to save. If you do a big chunk of work and you're like, okay, I need to be able to come back to this version of it, you'll want to like save as and save it as like, this is the project I got done this day, and then you can work on from there to make sure that you preserve the things that work without the risk of, if you change that, not being able to go back to it. Under the edit menu, you have the very standard cut, copy, and paste. We'll be messing with those a bit more when we get a little bit further down this menu. And for the beginning Unity programmer, those are going to be the three things that you'll use most frequently. Duplicate should just copy and paste something. and then rename, we'll let you rename something. Under the Assets tab, we have a number of things that can be used. Again, the assets are the things that are in your game. They're the building blocks of the game you are making. You do want to organize your assets. You'll see that there's an assets folder down here, and you can create a folder and organize your assets. Like here, we'll say the cubes go here. We'll be making some cubes in a minute, but it helps separate the different items in your scene so you can quickly find them or add them to your scene if you want to make more of them. There's also game objects, and on the surface, assets and game objects sound very similar because they're both the things that go into the game, but the asset is the file that you insert into the game so that you can make game objects that look like that. If you have one tree asset and then you want a bunch of trees in your game, you can put, say, 6 trees into the game, and you have 6 tree game objects that are all using the asset of the tree. Under the assets as well, you also have the C# projects, so you can start working for the scripts here. Creating a script from scratch is a bit outside the scope of this specific presentation, but we will be looking at them once we pull up some demos. The other thing you like to use from the assets is if you import something, if you import an asset, this is the menu you would go to make sure that it properly gets registered with the Unity software so that you can easily bring it into your game. Game object. This lets you insert the actual object that you can manipulate into the game. So under the game objects tab, you've got 3D objects, which is when you're first starting and you're just seeing what you can do here, is a very useful tab because if I want to add a cube to this game, there's a cube. I just went to game object, 3D object, and then a cube. You can also put a sphere here. And now there's 2 game objects in the game. And we can say we want to make more cubes, but we want to make sure that they're exactly the same as this cube that we have right here. If the cube is selected, because I clicked on it, you can go to Edit, Copy, Edit, Paste, and now there's 2 more cubes, or there's another cube. You can also just, I thought you could right click it, but I guess you can't. So now that we have some objects that we can manipulate on this screen, we can use this menu that's underneath the main file menu. So it's currently on this icon that has the 4 arrows, the move tool, and there are arrows sticking out of this cube. Because the move tool is selected, we can see those and we can drag them up or drag them over. Additionally, over here in the inspector tab, we can see the different positions as well as some indicators of size. So if we change the size, if we change the X to 2, and we've made, that's just the hitbox. This is where I need to change it up in scale. And now it's twice as big. Turn that back to 1. In general, you want, I was editing in the box collider, and generally you want that to be about the same size as the object that you're working with so you can see where things are going to collide. But if I want to make it super wide or tall, you can just mess with the different qualities that are up here in the transform section of the inspector and change how that cube is oriented. Up here at the top menu again, we do also have this hand tool. The hand tool is different than the move tool because it instead controls where the game developer's camera is. So by clicking the left side and dragging around, I am moving around in the game space. If I right click and move around, then I rotate where I am, whereas the move tool actually moves where my camera is, or the hand tool on the left click. And then we still have this light here. Click on the directional light and see where that is. Can move things around, slide you down. And I can't see if the light is interacting with the sphere, so we can rotate. Ah, that's why there's no shadow being cast, because this is way too far over. Still, wait. There we go. So now we can see how this light interacts with the different 3D spaces that are in there. And there are different types of lights that change how different things can interact. You can also rotate objects. It doesn't really show very well when it's a sphere, but if you click on the cube and we want to rotate this, by clicking on the rotate tool up at the top below the assets button, you can then adjust how the object is rotated. The scale icon also lets you make things bigger, but it makes it without having to go into the transform inspector side. The inspector is going to be more precise, but if you are just trying to get something generally the right size, then you can just mess with the scale tool. Move that down. And this one right here, move, rotator, scale, utilizes all three of those main transforms together. So we can change both where it is and how it rotates and how big it is using the different types of arrows that are here. The pointy arrows are the moving ones, the curved lines are the rotations, and then the squares are the scale. There's a couple of other game objects that are particularly useful. You can add terrain, which just puts things on the floor. And there are some terrain editing tools that are available over here in the inspector. Make it really tall. Unity collision can sometimes be a little confusing. So sometimes you just want to have the 3D objects in the space. You can just make a really big rectangle and have it on the floor, and that has a built-in collider. But it's good to know that the terrain is there in case you want to make something that requires a little bit more sculpting. Okay, and then one other thing is over here in the hierarchy, it can be easier to select things, especially once, oh, I can't see all the items that I made earlier. I can't see my cube or my directional light. So you can zoom in a little bit and try to click it that way, or you can just select it from the hierarchy. I'm going to get rid of the terrain just so we can see a little better. There we go. One other thing you can add in here is create empty, which just makes a game object that has nothing in it. But you can then put the different objects that we have made into the game object. So now if I want to move all of these, I can. It lets you group the objects together, which can be useful if you have like a collection of trees that you want to tile and to make a forest, or if you have a bunch of, if you just decided that you need to move this over here, you don't have to redo all of it by moving them one at a time. You can select them all and move them all at once. The game object also has a spot for entering the user interface, which is honestly a whole class on its own. So, but know that that's there, and that's how you would insert different UI interfaces. You can add audio, you can add video or lights. We added a new light. And then they all interact with each other in that space that you have created. Okay. One thing that I personally found very useful when I was making, working with Unity for the first time is under the assets, you can create and then select material. And while there's a lot of things that you can do with material, the most useful one that I found was that it let you pick a color, because all the default objects that you insert into Unity are the same gray or white cubes. And then if you just drag a material that has a color attached to it to one of the shapes that you have, it will color that. And that can really help determine, it's like, oh, this is the floor, and then this is where the player is, and these are stand-in for enemies that we haven't animated yet. It just helps you see things when you're making the grand strokes of what your level is going to be before you bring in the actual assets. Okay. And then the component menu is the last one that we're going to look at today. And you can just add properties to things that already exist. So if you go into component and then you can add a layout, an effect, a mesh, physics is something you'd often use. You could add a script. There's a lot of different tile maps if you're doing a 2D game and you want to use a tile map to bring all your 2D sprites in. And don't really have any examples prepared for using these so far, but it lets you add different bits to a specific object's inspector side, and that can let you manipulate them and use them in new and more complicated ways. All right, we're going to go into the part of the demo that actually has a game made. It looks like 2D was the choice by a margin. If anyone has any questions while that gets set up, please feel free to ask. Real quick. Oh, hold on. Give me one moment. we go. And share. So now we've got a Unity project pulled up. It has just a little bit more in it. We've got one thing that couldn't really be shown very well in the empty example is that up here, there's a play and a pause button. And if you click it, it opens up the game, which lets you interact with everything as if you were playing the finished game. And then to stop it, you just hit the play button. So that, again, that's one of the benefits of using a game engine is that you're able to see how the game runs without having to compile the whole thing and run the game as if it were complete already. You can start with just a portion of it, and then it'll let you play through whatever you have. The player here, which is hiding behind many icons, is something that has a bunch of different things going on in the inspector. That has an audio source, and then the player controller script. And it has, down here, we have the scripts that are in the assets folder at the bottom in the project section. And you can look at the player script. And this is, because I said we would look at scripts earlier. So there's a lot of code here. Unity projects. Unity provides some basic projects to interact with and change. That's what this microgame is. It's something Unity has on their website for people who want to get started in Unity to mess around with. They do have different scripts that people can use so that they can get started without having any programming knowledge. One thing to note is that these lines that start with the triple slash are comments. So they explain what the code underneath them is doing. So we're not going to go into how this script works because that's a lot of programming jargon. But if you click on the player under the controller script, this is all the things you can change in the player script to allow them to change how the player interacts with the world. So we've got different sounds that'll play when the player jumps. You can make gravity stronger. You can increase their speed. They were going at 3. I feel like that's a little bit slow. Let's try 10. And then now that we've changed that, we can save. And then we'll go into the game again. And I'm fast now. So there's a lot of messing around that you can do in these microgames that Unity has provided to see what changing things does. You can manipulate the enemies. We can make this particular blob huge if we want to. Why not? Now it's a really long blob. You can slide it over, and now it'll be next to us as the game starts. And it's just really tall. Okay. Did we have any questions the last time we called up for questions? Or does anyone have any questions now? Does anyone have anything they want me to do in this scene?
No questions at this time.
All right. I saw that we had interest in the 3D demo as well. So if you guys want to bear with me for just a little bit longer, I can pull up the 3D demo and we can look at that for a little bit. Okay. And then all right, and this is the 3D game. Because this is a micro game that comes with Unity, it comes with a tutorial, so it walks you through a couple of different types of changes you can make. But we're going to close that tutorial for now and bring the inspector over so we can see more of this 3D game. And you can see instead of against like a picture with one moving player, we have a 3D environment that has light sources and another player here who can interact in a 3D space. And then if we start this game, it's got the same music, but you can just see how different interactions change within the space. And then you can still, just like in the other games, select different portions, level, environment. There's a lot of objects underneath the environment. So yeah, the empty objects can be used to really organize because there's a lot of different things that are interacted with right here. So if we want to move all these trees, let's move all these trees. Now the forest is over here. All right. This is the last call for questions before we go into the closing portion of the program.
No questions at this time.
All right. Give me 1 second to get back to the PowerPoint. Here we go. Okay. Thank you all for coming. We do appreciate you being here. There are many more resources for learning how to program with Unity out there. Unity.com in particular is Unity's website where they have a bunch of different tutorials as well as different assets that you can use in your games for some are free and some are paid. There's also LinkedIn learning courses that can be used to work through different types of Unity situations, different things you want to do in Unity. And you do have access to LinkedIn Learning through the Plano Public Library. We also have digital creation spaces at the Haggard Library and the Parr Library. And inside those digital creation spaces, the computers do have Unity installed, so you could work at the computers in those spaces to make your games. Be sure to stay up to date with Plano Public Library by following our Facebook page and checking out our blog at planolearns.org. You can find recordings of past programs and other materials about how to take advantage of everything Plano Public Library has to offer. Please complete our program survey, which should pop up following this program. We value your feedback. Thanks again for joining us today, and we will see you next time.